In the dense and stifling autumn of 1859, in the isolated settlement of Meow Creek, Louisiana, a 7-year-old black boy named Samuel Carter became the focus of one of the most peculiar and terrifying medical puzzles ever documented in the American South before the Civil War. Dr. Elizabeth Monroe, the sole formally trained physician in a region where most still relied on folk healers, herbalists, and midwives, filled 2 leather notebooks with observations on a child whose unique capabilities defied every known explanation of the time. To a casual observer, Samuel appeared unremarkable, small, slender, with calm, dark eyes that seldom blinked, and skin the deep color of rich river earth. Yet, concealed behind that tranquil, harmless exterior was an intellect so extraordinary that the contemporary science was simply unable to account for it. Over the course of 7 unsettling months, 9 individuals died in mysterious ways after having spent time in Samuel's presence. Each victim was discovered with their eyes wide open, as if they had witnessed something no human should ever see in their final moments. The young boy himself asserted that he could hear sounds emanating from the swamp, voices that shared secrets, revealed hidden facts, and forewarned him of impending deaths. He knew things no child, particularly one who lacked the ability to read or write, should have known. He could describe human organs with absolute precision, foresee illnesses before the manifestation of symptoms, and articulate personal dreams that people had carefully guarded in their minds. Dreams they had never disclosed to anyone else. Many official documents were destroyed or lost during the Civil War, but Dr. Monroe's journals remarkably endured. They remained tucked away in the dusty attic of her former residence for over a century. What these pages reveal about Samuel Carter challenges our fundamental understanding of the limits of the human intellect and raises disturbing questions about capacities that science still has yet to completely explain. This is the account of a black child whose extraordinary gifts frightened the white populace, whose mind posed a threat to the very underpinnings of a system constructed upon the premise of black inferiority, and whose life serves as a reflection of the countless brilliant black individuals who were silenced, erased, or destroyed simply because their greatness was incompatible with the world they were born into. Samuel Carter was born in the spring of 1852 on the Whitmore Plantation, one of Ascension Parish's largest cotton estates. His mother, Esther Carter, was employed within the plantation house as a domestic worker. She had secretly learned to read, despite laws that strictly prohibited enslaved individuals from acquiring literacy. She would trace letters in the dirt behind the kitchen, instructing Samuel quietly during brief, stolen moments. His father's name was never documented in any record, having been sold to another plantation before Samuel reached the age of 2. Esther never spoke of him. Yet Samuel would sometimes wake late at night to find his mother seated by the window, tears tracing lines down her face as she gazed into the darkness beyond the slave quarters. When Samuel was just 4, Esther developed a persistent, deep cough. The plantation owner, Robert Whitmore, declined to summon a doctor, claiming it was a waste of resources to spend money on a slave's health. He compelled her to continue working even as her strength waned each week. Samuel would sit by her bedside at night, grasping her hand tightly, and whisper observations that caused her alarm. "Mama," he declared one evening, with a peculiar gravity that was unnatural for a young child. "The ailment is expanding inside you like a blooming flower. Its roots are spreading through your chest. The voices from the swamp told me it will claim you before the cotton blossoms again." Esther passed away 3 months later in February of 1856. Coughing blood into rags, Samuel desperately tried to clean and fold. Samuel did not weep during the burial. He stood motionless while the other enslaved people sang gentle spirituals over her grave in the corner of the plantation where black bodies were interred without markers, without stones, without any sign of their existence. When asked why he hadn't shed any tears, Samuel calmly replied, "She is not gone. She speaks to me now, just like the others in the swamp. She says she is free now." The enslaved community on the Whitmore plantation began to regard the child with increasing fear daily. They murmured that something lived within his gaze, something ancient and knowledgeable, something that no child should possess. He frequently observed people with an intense, unsettling concentration, as though he could penetrate their hearts and read every secret they harbored within themselves. Old Jeremiah, the most senior man on the plantation, informed everyone that Samuel had been born with a caul covering his face, a thin membrane sometimes present at birth. People believed this indicated the child could perceive beyond this reality into the domain of spirits and the deceased. "That boy sees too much," Jeremiah cautioned. "He knows things a living person is not meant to know." Even Robert Whitmore recognized Samuel was unique, though his reasons for concern were different. The boy was too smart, too perceptive, too articulate for an enslaved child who had never attended school. One day, when Samuel was 5, Whitmore discovered him sketching shapes in the dirt. They were not childish drawings, but intricate diagrams of the human heart, complete with labels written in careful penmanship. "Where did you learn to write like this?" Whitmore demanded, rage flashing across his face. Samuel looked up with those steady, unblinking eyes and said, "The voices teach me. They show me images in my mind, and I draw them. They say the body is like a dwelling, and when the dwelling breaks, the person residing inside must depart." This answer unsettled Whitmore in a profound way. A black child who possessed greater knowledge than him, who displayed talent far exceeding anything permitted under the rules of slavery, threatened the very rationale that sustained the entire system. If a slave child could be this intelligent without formal education, what did that suggest about the falsehood of black inferiority that buttressed slavery itself? Samuel's mere existence challenged the false beliefs that upheld the cruel order of the South. By the summer of 1856, when Samuel was 4.5 but already thinking like someone much older, Robert Whitmore made a harsh decision. He sold the boy to a traveling slave dealer who was passing through the area. Whitmore wished to be rid of the child who disturbed him, who shattered everything he believed about race simply by existing and thinking. Samuel was taken from the only home he had ever known, separated from the people who had tried to care for him after his mother's death, and transported north along the Mississippi River. The trader understood Samuel was too intelligent to be relegated to cotton fields. The boy's peculiar demeanor, acute intellect, and unnerving composure made him valuable. The trader believed he could secure a high price for a child as exceptional as Samuel. Perhaps he would have been sold to a wealthy household desiring a strange child for exhibition, or to a medical school in pursuit of rare cases to examine. However, Samuel never reached any auction block. During a brief halt in Marrow Creek, the slave trader who owned him, a man named Cyrus Blackwood, suddenly collapsed in violent spasms. His body thrashed so fiercely that several men were required to restrain him. He perished only hours later, blood issuing from his nose and ears while his limbs convulsed uncontrollably. The local physician could offer no explanation for the event. Samuel stood silently in the corner of the boarding house room while Blackwood screamed and writhed on the floor. The boy watched the entire event with those cool, steady, unblinking eyes that unnerved everyone present. When questioned by the authorities, Samuel simply stated, "He harmed children. The voices informed me of what he did. They said his time was finished." When local officials investigated Blackwood's history, they uncovered a disturbing pattern. Numerous enslaved children under his supervision over the past 5 years had died under suspicious circumstances. He had accounted for disappearances as runaways. Bodies found drifting in nearby waters were dismissed as accidental drownings. Sudden illnesses afflicted children only after Blackwood had taken possession of them. No one had ever pressed the issue, but Samuel somehow knew secrets that no one else had dared to investigate, secrets that perished with Blackwood in that dimly lit room. With Blackwood deceased and no legal owner stepping forward to claim Samuel, the boy faced an unusual predicament. In the strictest technical sense, he was free, although that word held little weight for a black child in Louisiana during 1856. Local officials considered sending him to an orphanage, but none of the institutions in the area admitted black children. He was too young for hard labor, too disturbing to be housed by any of the white families, and too intelligent to be simply abandoned on the streets.
It was Dr. Elizabeth Monroe who ultimately consented to take the child into her residence. Elizabeth Monroe was a rarity in the Old South, a woman trained as a doctor. She had pursued medical studies in Philadelphia, then returned to Louisiana to practice in a society that believed women had no role in such work. Despite the social pressure and legal restrictions placed upon her, she utilized the independence inherited from her father to live according to her own principles. One of these beliefs was a quiet yet firm rejection of slavery. When she heard whispers about an odd black child who had been present when Cyrus Blackwood died, her professional curiosity intensified. The instant she met Samuel and looked into his dark, perceptive eyes, she felt something stir within her, a blend of fascination, concern, and a strong conviction that this child needed protection from a world that would inevitably destroy him if he were left alone. "What is your name?" Dr. Monroe inquired when the sheriff delivered Samuel to her door. The sheriff appeared relieved, thankful that someone was willing to take responsibility for the boy. Samuel stared up at her with his typical unblinking intensity and answered, "Samuel Carter. My mama named me Samuel because she said it means God has heard. She said I was born to hear things other people couldn't, to know things they didn't. The voices talked to me before I could respond to them." Dr. Monroe did not consider herself superstitious. She believed in science, in facts, in meticulous observation. Her education had trained her to reject gossip and fear. But something about this child challenged her commitment to pure scientific logic. He spoke with a clarity far too advanced for a boy his age, especially one who had never been taught to read. He described parts of the body with detail that even medical students struggled to retain. And when he spoke of the voices, he did so without confusion or alarm, only calm acceptance, as if he were describing sunshine or rainfall. Dr. Monroe made Samuel an offer. He could remain with her, not as a servant, nor as an adopted child, but as someone she would meticulously study. In exchange, she would provide him with a safe place to reside, regular meals, clothing, and the opportunity to learn. "I want to understand how your mind functions," she told him gently. "I want to document what you are capable of, but I will treat you with respect. If you ever wish to depart, I will assist you in finding another suitable location." Samuel listened with the peculiar seriousness that made adults uneasy. "Finally," he replied, "the voices say you are different. They say you perceive people as human beings, not objects. They say you are trying to grasp what others fear. I will stay with you, Dr. Monroe, but you must know something. The people who become close to me, the ones with dark intentions, the ones who harbor cruelty in their hearts, they do not remain alive for long. I do not kill them. I simply know when death is approaching. And sometimes the voices, they accelerate its arrival." Such a declaration should have alarmed Dr. Monroe, but instead it intensified her curiosity. She had heard of individuals with exceptional minds, those with flawless memory, people who could instantly calculate large figures, children who could reproduce music after a single hearing. But Samuel appeared to be something entirely different. He did not merely think quickly, he knew things that he could not possibly have acquired through any conventional means. His abilities transcended the boundary between extraordinary intelligence and something that her medical education could not categorize. He was not just gifted, he seemed to possess knowledge originating from a source far beyond the natural world. Dr. Monroe began systematically studying Samuel Carter in August of 1856, only a few weeks after he moved into her residence. She maintained detailed records of every conversation, every unusual remark he made, and every prediction he whispered. What she discovered both astonished her and filled her with quiet dread. Samuel could describe the internal organs of the human body without ever having viewed a medical diagram. He foretold illnesses in people weeks before they experienced any symptoms. He knew private information about strangers' lives, secrets they had concealed for years. "How do you know?" Dr. Monroe repeatedly asked him, desperate to uncover some reasonable explanation. Samuel always replied with the same calm conviction. "The voices tell me. They originate from the swamp, from the place where the deceased wait because they did not complete what they needed to do. They speak to me because I possess the ability to hear them. My mother said it is a trait passed down through our blood. My grandmother had it, and her mother also. It is both a blessing and a burden, Dr. Monroe. I know things I wish I did not. I see things I would prefer not to see." Marcus Thornton, a wealthy plantation owner from a neighboring parish, visited Mororo Creek on business and stopped at Dr. Monroe's home to request assistance with persistent stomach pains. Samuel was inside when Thornton arrived, and the boy's reaction was immediate and disconcerting. He recoiled the moment the man entered, his dark eyes widening with a combination of recognition and terror. "You should not have come here," Samuel said softly, yet with a strange certainty that was out of place for a 7-year-old child. "The voices are shouting about you. They claim you killed 3 children, 2 boys and a small girl. They say you concealed their remains in the old burial ground behind your house where the slave graves have no markers. They say those children still weep at night, and their mothers continue to search for them." Thornton's face lost all color before turning crimson with indignation. "How dare this slave child address me in such a manner?" he yelled at Dr. Monroe. "Control your property, or I will have him whipped for his insolence." But beneath Thornton's fury, a glimpse of genuine fear was evident, a fear only a man with terrible secrets would display when confronted. Dr. Monroe, disturbed but unwilling to abandon Samuel, replied sternly, "He is not my property, Mr. Thornton. He is under my supervision, and I ask you to leave my home." Thornton stormed out, his forgotten stomach pains replaced by anger and alarm. 3 days later, he was discovered lifeless in his carriage on the road back to his plantation. The official report attributed the death to heart failure, but when Dr. Monroe examined the body, she noted details that chilled her. Thornton's eyes were stretched wide open, frozen in horror. His mouth was agape as if he had died mid-scream, and faint marks, resembling fingers, were visible on his neck, despite the fact that he had been traveling alone. When she returned home and informed Samuel, the boy simply nodded. "The voices said he would not reach home," Samuel murmured. "They said the children he harmed were waiting for him. They said his moment had arrived." Dr. Monroe felt a cold dread creep up her spine. "Samuel," she whispered, "are you suggesting you somehow caused this?" Samuel shook his head. "I don't make anything happen, Dr. Monroe. I only know. The voices do not deceive. When they declare someone must answer for what they did, it invariably occurs." Authorities soon conducted a search of Thornton's plantation grounds. In the old cemetery among the unmarked slave graves, they exhumed the remains of 3 young children, 2 boys approximately 8 and 10 years old, and a girl barely 6. All bore evidence of brutal harm. Nothing about their deaths aligned with the routine hardships of plantation life. Instead, they pointed to the twisted cruelty of a man who considered himself untouchable. When finally given an opportunity to speak without fear, enslaved people from Thornton's plantation recounted stories that had long been suppressed, tales of missing children, of screams heard from Thornton's private chambers, of a man who masked monstrous acts behind wealth and polite behavior. Samuel had spoken the truth without ever setting foot on Thornton's land. The moment he saw the man, he had known everything, as though the whispers from the swamp had poured every terrible secret directly into his mind. Dr. Monroe realized this was not mere speculation. Her medical knowledge could not account for it. Samuel possessed a capability far beyond any scientific comprehension. The next death occurred in October, just weeks after Thornton's mysterious demise. Reverend Silas Jameson, the leader of Mororo Creek's largest church, stood proudly each Sunday preaching about mercy and kindness, while secretly profiting from the slave trade. He facilitated deals between plantations, earning money from the sale of human beings. To the white townspeople, he was a respected spiritual authority. To the black community, he was a wolf disguised as a shepherd, a man who used scripture to justify cruelty and his authority to support the separation of families and endless suffering. Samuel encountered Reverend Jameson at the general store where Dr. Monroe had brought him for supplies. The Reverend approached with his customary smooth smile, one that always appeared insincere. "Dr. Monroe," he greeted her warmly, "I hear you've taken in young Samuel. How generous of you, though I must caution you that educating these people beyond their station can be perilous. God has assigned them their purpose in this world, and altering that order invites disruption." Samuel gazed up at him with his deep, sharp eyes. "You do not believe in God," he said quietly. "The voices say you ceased believing after you sold a woman and her infant to separate buyers. The woman took her own life, and the baby perished not long after. You tell yourself it was merely business, but you hear her weeping every night in your dreams. You drink to forget, but you are never able. The voices say your end is approaching too. They say you will confront all the people you hurt." Reverend Jameson's expression instantly contorted. The polite facade vanished, replaced by something cold, furious, and terrified. "That boy is possessed by evil spirits," he spat. "He speaks falsehoods and malice. Keeping him in your home is inviting darkness into your life." He departed swiftly, his hands trembling, his face devoid of color. 2 weeks later, he was found deceased in his study. He was slumped over his desk, an empty bottle of laudanum next to him. The official record classified it as suicide due to stress or despair. Yet when Dr. Monroe examined him, she observed that same unmistakable horror in his eyes, the same wide, frozen stare she had witnessed in Thornton. Papers lay strewn across his desk, revealing letters he had been writing, apologies to those he had wronged. One unfinished letter was addressed to a woman named Sarah, the very woman Samuel had mentioned, expressing regret for selling her and her child separately 15 years prior. The apology broke off mid-sentence, as though something had interrupted him so abruptly and completely that he chose death over facing it. When Dr. Monroe returned home and found Samuel reading quietly, she was unsure how to begin. Samuel looked up at her with tired eyes that seemed older than any child should. "He could not continue living with what he had done any more," Samuel said softly. "The voices followed him every night. They showed him Sarah's infant dying alone. They whispered all the names of the people he injured. He knew it was wrong, but he chose money instead of compassion. The voices do not excuse choices like that." Dr. Monroe sank heavily into her chair, fighting the weight of everything she had witnessed. "Samuel," she said gently, "this is becoming perilous. People are dying shortly after encountering you. Even if you are not the cause, the pattern is too distinct. If more deaths occur, the town will turn against you. They will claim you are cursed or evil or worse. I may not be able to shield you." Samuel slowly closed his book, sorrow clouding his face. "I know, Dr. Monroe. My family always advised us to conceal gifts like mine. My mother taught me to remain silent so white people would not notice what I could do. But the voices sometimes shout so loudly I cannot stay quiet. Sometimes the truth they reveal to me is too painful to bear alone. I did not select this gift, but it is mine. The voices say I am meant to uncover the things hidden in darkness, even when it leads to danger." The pattern did not cease. It intensified over the subsequent months. Individuals who crossed Samuel's path, those carrying cruelty, guilt, or unconfessed misdeeds, began to die under strange circumstances. Not every person he met, only those the voices designated. A slave catcher named William Drake, known for his brutal pursuit of runaways, died when his horse suddenly reared and crushed him against a tree, fracturing his neck. Samuel had seen him in town earlier and quietly told Dr. Monroe he killed 12 people who were only trying to be free. The voices say he will die quickly and violently, the same way he treated others. A woman named Catherine Bellamy, who operated a boarding house where enslaved people were held before being sold, died in her sleep with her face frozen in a silent scream. Samuel had whispered about her previously, too. "She adds poison to food when people cry too loudly," he said. "The voices showed me 3 women who died that way. Fear will poison her the same way she poisoned them." Every death was given some explanation: natural causes, accidents, physical frailty. But the pattern was undeniable. Samuel Carter knew things he should not know. He predicted death with astonishing precision, and the individuals were always those who had inflicted harm on others, particularly enslaved people. It was as though Samuel was a conduit for something ancient and righteous, something that moved through him in ways he could not regulate. Dr. Monroe's journals from this period reflect her growing internal conflict, fear, and inability to act. She had always trusted in science, in meticulous observation, in concrete evidence. She tried testing Samuel, seeking logical explanations. Perhaps he noticed details that others missed, or maybe he possessed an extraordinary memory. But even when she stretched her logical mind as far as possible, the truth continued to slip beyond the boundaries of reason. Samuel knew things he could not have observed. He described events he had no physical means of witnessing. His predictions proved correct again and again, with unnerving exactitude. She recorded in her journal in early 1857 that Samuel possessed knowledge she could not explain. He understood the interior of organs he had never studied. He named diseases without any training. He could look at a stranger and tell her private details about their past that he should not have known. She confessed that she was compelled to entertain the possibility that Samuel might be accessing something beyond the physical world. As a doctor, this possibility terrified her. As a person, it forced her to question the limits of everything she thought she comprehended. Meanwhile, the town's view of Samuel grew increasingly hostile. Many white residents whispered that the boy was cursed or dangerous, that he carried death with him. They accused Dr. Monroe of being foolish, even reckless, for offering him sanctuary. The enslaved community, however, perceived things differently. To them, Samuel was a symbol, perhaps an angel, a prophet, or a spirit given human form. They recognized his gift not as something sinister, but as something ancient. One day, an older man named Jeremiah sought Samuel out. He had once lived on the Whitmore plantation, but had been sold years earlier. He found Samuel sitting by the swamp near Dr. Monroe's home, gazing at the still water. Jeremiah approached gently, his old body aching, and told the boy he needed to speak with him about who he was and the power he carried. Samuel softly informed him that he already knew Jeremiah intended to speak of the old ways, the traditions brought from Africa. He knew Jeremiah would tell him that his gift was neither wicked nor strange, but a part of their heritage. Jeremiah sat beside him and explained that Samuel's mother had possessed the same ability, and her mother before her. The knowledge spanned generations, long before they were transported across the ocean. Jeremiah explained that, although enslavers attempted to eradicate their culture, some memories persisted. Some families kept the old powers concealed, passing them down quietly. He told Samuel that people used various names for the ability. Some called it sight. Others termed it walking between worlds. Some believed it was the voice of ancestors speaking through the living. Whatever the designation, it was authentic, potent, and dangerous in a world that sought to deny any strength to people like them. As Samuel listened, he learned about the healers in Africa, those who could sense illness before it appeared, those who could converse with the dead or transmit messages across realms. He learned that his ability was not a curse, but a connection, a surviving link that bound him to the past, to his people, to something resilient enough to withstand everything they had endured. But Jeremiah cautioned him to be prudent. He stated that white people were already afraid of him because he represented a truth they refused to acknowledge, that enslaved people were not inferior, not simple, and not powerless. He told Samuel that people feared him because he served as evidence that they were wrong, that he was just as capable and just as human as anyone else. And now, Jeremiah said, you are demonstrating something even more terrifying. You are proving that we might possess abilities they neither understand nor control. That frightens them more than anything. He warned Samuel that such people always turn against anyone who displays too much power, too much knowledge, too much light. He told the boy he had to learn when to hide his gift, when to diminish himself so they wouldn't destroy him. Samuel nodded slowly. He grasped the wisdom in the old man's voice, but deep down he already knew the truth. Hiding would soon become impossible. The voices were growing louder each day. They pressed into his mind with a force that felt urgent and relentless. They showed him events that had not yet come to pass, terrifying visions of a future that frightened him. They showed him a coming war, a conflict that would tear the nation apart. They showed him rivers running red, fields strewn with bodies, and cities ablaze. They showed him the abolition of slavery, but also the long years of suffering that would follow freedom. And worst of all, they showed him his own future, brief yet brilliant, like a candle consuming itself too quickly. He saw himself shining for a moment in time before being crushed by forces too strong to oppose. Everything changed in March of 1857. That was when Samuel encountered a man who challenged everything he believed about his gift. This man was unlike the others. He carried no guilt substantial enough to mark him for death. Yet there was a darkness within him that the voices reacted to instantly. His name was Benjamin Cole, a slave trader who had arrived in Morrow Creek with 20 enslaved people to sell. But Cole was also slowly and painfully dying from a cancer that was consuming his body. Samuel first saw him when Cole visited Dr. Monroe's home seeking medical assistance. The instant their eyes met, the voices erupted in Samuel's head. But this time, they were not whispering about retribution or judgment. They were shouting a warning. They hissed that Cole was like him, someone with the gift, someone who could perceive inside people just as Samuel could. But Cole utilized his ability for profit, for malice, for breaking human beings until they were easy to sell. Dr. Monroe noticed Samuel's distress and inquired what was wrong. But the boy was unable to speak. His mind was reeling from the realization that he was not alone, and that someone with the identical gift could pervert it into something horrific. Benjamin Cole looked at Samuel with a peculiar expression, as if recognizing a familiar form in a mirror. He spoke softly, almost with amusement, saying he had heard rumors about the boy who knew things no child should know, who predicted deaths and revealed truths that unnerved the town. He said he had never credited the stories until that moment. But now he could perceive the spark in Samuel, the same spark he himself carried. Samuel forced himself to speak, his voice rough and strained. He told Cole he was nothing like him. The voices had informed Samuel of what Cole did, how he used his insight to locate the most vulnerable individuals, the ones he could break fastest. He accused Cole of twisting a sacred gift into a tool for cruelty. Cole laughed, a cold laugh entirely devoid of genuine humor. He told Samuel not to deceive himself. He asserted that the gift was not given for any noble purpose. It simply existed, and each person chose how to wield it. Samuel might tell himself he was acting on the side of justice, but Cole claimed he was equally culpable of using his power to determine who lived and who died. Cole maintained that the world did not care about right or wrong, only about what could be utilized. This profoundly shook Samuel. For the first time, he questioned everything. Was Cole correct? Was the gift merely a tool, unbound by any higher purpose? Were the voices truly ancestral, or were they just his own suffering echoing back at him? Had he been punishing people for the sake of justice or because he was angry at the world? Dr. Monroe dismissed Cole with medicine and warned him that his cancer would soon take his life. After Cole left, she sat beside Samuel and waited for him to speak. When he finally did, his voice trembled. He asked her, "What if I have misinterpreted everything? What if the voices were not from beyond? What if they were just fragmented pieces of my own sorrow pretending to be something sacred?" She responded gently, selecting her words with care. She admitted she could not account for the voices. She did not know whether they originated from spirits or from Samuel's mind, but she did know that every detail he had ever shared had proven true in ways no conventional explanation could cover. She reminded him that every person who died after meeting him had caused real suffering. She told him that intentions mattered, that Cole used his ability to inflict harm, while Samuel used his to uncover truth. Her words provided comfort, but only slightly. The doubt Cole had introduced continued to spread like a shadow across his thoughts. Samuel grew quieter in the ensuing weeks. He still heard the voices and saw the visions, but he was hesitant to act upon them. He questioned everything. Benjamin Cole died in May of 1857. The cancer finally claimed him. But before his death, he did something unexpected. He penned a lengthy confession and sent it to Dr. Monroe. The letter arrived 3 days after his passing. In it, Cole described in agonizing detail the brutal methods he had employed to break the people he sold. He listed names, dozens of them, and the locations they had been transported to. He wrote how he had used his unnatural insight to discover each person's deepest fear, then crush them with it until they became submissive. At the conclusion of the letter, he wrote that Samuel had seen him clearly from the moment they met. He admitted that he had spent his life believing he was doing what was necessary to survive. But when he looked into Samuel's eyes, he finally recognized what he had become: a monster. Cole stated that the cancer in his body was nothing in comparison to the sickness in his soul, and he instructed Dr. Monroe to deliver a message to Samuel, that the boy had been right about him, and that he should never become what Cole had become. "It won't erase what I've done," he wrote, "but maybe it will count for something in whatever judgment awaits me." The documents Cole included with his letter contained precise records of his work over 20 years of slave trading. There were names, ages, descriptions, prices, and the plantations where people were sent. Everything an abolitionist group would need to attempt to locate enslaved people who had been separated from their families. Dr. Monroe understood both the significance and the danger of these papers. She copied every page by hand and sent the copies to her contacts in the North, people working with the Underground Railroad, and other groups assisting enslaved people in finding freedom. Samuel's reaction to Cole's confession was complex. In one sense, it confirmed that Samuel's initial perception of the man had been accurate and that his strange gift had not failed him. But it also raised challenging thoughts about forgiveness and justice. Cole had committed terrible acts, but at the very end of his life he had shown genuine remorse and attempted, albeit in a small way, to rectify his wrongs. Did that matter? Did the voices care about belated repentance? If Cole had survived long enough to act on his guilt, would he have been spared the punishment that befell others who never showed regret? Samuel contemplated these questions through the summer of 1857 as he continued his unconventional life in Dr. Monroe's home. She was teaching him to read and write at an advanced level, showing him books on medicine, philosophy, and science. He learned rapidly, absorbing every piece of information as if he had been starved for it. He yearned to comprehend the world and his role within it. But even with all this learning, the voices did not subside. They continued speaking, showing him events occurring far away and events that had yet to take place. In August of 1857, the visions transformed. Samuel began seeing things he had never witnessed before. Instead of individual people and their secrets, the voices showed him crowds, entire societies moving like storms. He saw armies marching, cities consumed by fire, and rivers running with blood. He saw black men in Union blue uniforms fighting and dying for freedom, a freedom that would come at a terrible cost. He saw Abraham Lincoln signing documents that would alter the status of millions of enslaved people. He saw the joy of emancipation, then the terror that followed when Reconstruction failed, and new systems of hatred arose to replace slavery. He saw generations engaged in the same struggle repeatedly, each pushing slightly closer to justice but never fully achieving it. These visions exhausted him in ways the earlier ones never had. He lost weight. He slept poorly. He woke up screaming, causing Dr. Monroe to rush to his bedside. "They are showing me too much," he told her during one of those nights. "They are showing me the future, not just for one person, but for all of us. There is a war coming, Dr. Monroe, a war that will tear this country apart, and even when slavery ends, the violence and hatred won't disappear with it. They will simply change form. They will establish new rules and new systems to keep us in chains. It will persist for generations." Dr. Monroe held the trembling boy, feeling helpless. She could not see what he saw or halt what he felt. "Samuel," she whispered, "you cannot bear all that pain. You cannot carry the past and the future simultaneously. You are still only a child." But Samuel shook his head. "I stopped being a child when my mother died and the voices started. I stopped being a child when I realized I could see inside people and know their secrets. The voices do not care that I am young. They utilize me because I can hear them. But sometimes I wish I couldn't. Sometimes I wish I was just a normal boy who knew nothing except how to play and laugh." The ninth and final death that occurred while Samuel lived in Morrow Creek came in September 1857. It was the death that compelled Dr. Monroe to make a decision she had been avoiding. The man who died was Judge Albert Crane, one of the most powerful men in the parish. His court rulings had protected slavery for decades, written in calm, meticulous language that treated human beings as mere property. He was notably harsh when presiding over cases involving enslaved people accused of crimes. His decisions were severe, his punishments extreme, and his reasoning was based on the conviction that black people were less than fully human. Samuel encountered Judge Crane at a social gathering that Dr. Monroe attended. She brought Samuel, even though it violated social conventions for a white woman to bring a black child to such an event, but she was reluctant to leave him alone anymore. As soon as Samuel saw the judge, his face turned pale, his body tensed. The voices struck him so forcefully that he felt them like a physical blow. Their message was so intense that he spoke without thinking. "You executed a man who was attempting to defend his daughter," Samuel said, his voice cutting through the sudden silence in the room. "His name was Thomas. He killed the overseer who was assaulting his 15-year-old daughter. You ruled that a slave had no right to protect his family. You stated that property cannot commit justifiable homicide. You watched him hang and felt nothing." The room was motionless. Everyone froze as Samuel continued, the words pouring out of him. "You have sent 47 people to death by hanging, 213 to brutal whippings. Countless others sold away from their loved ones. The voices say every one of those individuals is awaiting you. They say your judgment is imminent, and it will be as merciless as the judgments you delivered to them." Judge Crane erupted in fury. He demanded that Samuel be seized and punished. Several men advanced toward the boy, ready to grab him. Dr. Monroe reacted quickly, positioning herself between Samuel and the men. "This child is under my protection," she said sharply. "He is unwell. He requires compassion, not violence." But the judge was incensed. That boy has condemned me to death with lies. He will be apprehended and punished. No black child threatens a judge and is permitted to leave. Dr. Monroe knew they had only seconds. She pulled Samuel out of the building and rushed him home, disregarding the shouting behind them. As soon as they reached her house, she began formulating plans. "Samuel," she said, her voice urgent, "you must leave Maroro Creek tonight. Judge Crane will send men for you. They might murder you without even pretending it is legal. I have allies in the north who can help you, but you must go immediately." Samuel looked at her with tired old eyes. "It makes no difference whether I stay or leave," he said quietly. "The judge will die in 3 days. The voices have already determined it. His death is inevitable regardless of what we do. But you are right. I should depart, not to save him, but to prevent you from being blamed." That night, Dr. Monroe sent Samuel away with trustworthy allies who knew hidden routes toward freedom. She gave him papers claiming he was a free black child traveling with authorization, though they both knew such documents might not be effective. She gave him whatever money she could spare and letters addressed to abolitionists in the North who might offer him shelter. Then she embraced him tightly, this strange, brilliant child who had transformed her understanding of the world. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked. Samuel managed a small, sad smile. "The voices show me many possible futures, Dr. Monroe. In some futures we meet again," he said softly. "In others we do not. But in every one of them, I remember you as the person who saw me as human before anything else, and as gifted only after that. You treated me with respect when the world wished to treat me as either a slave or something terrifying. I will carry that with me wherever I go." With that, Samuel Carter vanished into the darkness, guided by conductors of the Underground Railroad. These men and women risked everything to help enslaved people and free black children escape toward safety. Dr. Monroe never saw him again, though for the remainder of her life she wondered what became of the extraordinary child who had changed her perception of human possibility. 3 days after Samuel departed, Judge Albert Crane was found dead in his office. It appeared he had suffered a severe stroke while working late, his body slumped over legal papers he had been reviewing. But the individuals who prepared him for burial noticed unusual details. His eyes were wide open, frozen in terror, and his mouth was stretched as though he had died mid-scream. Several witnesses claimed that shortly before his death, they heard something peculiar inside the courthouse. Many voices speaking all at once. No one comprehended the words, but the enslaved people whispered that the spirits of everyone Crane had sentenced had come to make him confront what he had done. They believed those souls had shown him the faces of all the people he had harmed. Whether this was fact or merely a story born from a deep yearning for justice, no living person could confirm. Dr. Elizabeth Monroe continued practicing medicine in Morrow Creek until the Civil War commenced in 1861. When Union troops occupied Louisiana in 1862, she volunteered as a doctor to treat wounded soldiers from both the Union and the Confederacy. She made no distinction between them. In her journals from this time, she wrote frequently about Samuel, attempting to understand what she had witnessed while he was under her care. She developed a theory that Samuel might represent a form of human adaptation, an ability arising from centuries of suffering, giving an oppressed people a means to detect danger and protect themselves in a violent world. But even as she considered scientific explanations, she could never fully dismiss the notion that Samuel's abilities were exactly what he claimed them to be, messages from the deceased, from ancestors determined to prevent their pain from being forgotten. Dr. Monroe passed away in 1891, but before she died, she left instructions that her journals be donated to a medical school in Philadelphia and kept sealed for 50 years. She did not wish for Samuel to become a target or a scientific experiment, but she believed future generations might gain knowledge from the records she had maintained with such diligence. The journals were finally opened in 1941 and examined by researchers investigating the boundaries of human consciousness. Samuel Carter's case became the subject of papers in psychology, neurology, and even parapsychology. But rather than offering clear answers, the journals only generated more questions. They provided detailed accounts of extraordinary events, yet offered no conclusive explanation for how any of it had been possible. But Samuel's story did not conclude the night he slipped out of Morrow Creek. Reports of a black boy with strange abilities began appearing in northern states during the late 1850s. In Pennsylvania, there were tales of a child who could diagnose illnesses without any medical training. In Massachusetts, people spoke of a young man who aided police in locating murder victims by saying he could hear the dead requesting justice. In Ohio, conductors on the Underground Railroad mentioned a teenager who always seemed to know which routes were safe and which were being watched. No one could state with certainty if all these stories were about the same person, or if Samuel was not as unique as Dr. Monroe had once believed. During the Civil War, rumors circulated of a black scout working for Union forces who could predict enemy troop movements and identify spies with remarkable accuracy. Some accounts described a young man who stood on battlefields after the fighting ended, tears streaming down his face as he spoke to the dead as if they were standing before him. Soldiers said he wrote down final messages for families, learning the names of dying men so they would not be forgotten. Several Union officers mentioned in their letters a remarkable black man named Samuel, whose intelligence and abilities surpassed anything they had ever encountered. But official records from the war are incomplete, and the truth is difficult to distinguish from rumor. After Reconstruction began, sightings of Samuel became less frequent, but far more disturbing. He was seen in locations where racial violence had occurred: lynchings, riots, massacres. Survivors sometimes described a thin black man with eyes that looked ancient, as if he carried centuries of memory. He would walk among the dead, documenting what had happened, writing names, marking stories that history books would later attempt to obliterate. Some claimed he could identify the killers even when they wore masks, speaking their names with absolute certainty because the voices had informed him. One of the most precise accounts came from Colfax, Louisiana, where a white mob murdered between 60 and 150 black men in 1873. One of the most severe acts of racial terror in American history. A survivor named Isaiah Freeman later recounted that a man who identified himself as Samuel walked among the bodies afterward, speaking softly as if the dead were responding to him. He was recording their names, Freeman stated in a 1920 interview. He told me the voices gave each name to him, told him who they were, who their families were. He said he was creating a record that could not be destroyed, something that would outlast any paper or book. Freeman asked Samuel how he could bear to be around so much death. Samuel replied, "I have walked with the dead since I was 4 years old. They frighten me less than the living. At least they speak the truth." The last verified sighting of someone believed to be Samuel Carter occurred in 1899 in Wilmington, North Carolina, following a violent coup in which white supremacists overthrew the elected government and killed dozens of black residents. A black journalist named Alexander Manley, forced to flee for his life, wrote that he encountered a man who said he was documenting the massacre for a record that will outlast the lies people tell about what truly happened. Manley described him as a thin, weary-looking man in his late 40s, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of every terrible thing that had ever happened to black people. When Manley asked his name, the man replied, "I've had many names. Samuel is the one my mother gave me. It means God has heard. I hope she was right." After 1899, there were no more confirmed sightings of Samuel Carter, though his name persisted in black communities throughout the South. He became a figure of local legend, a spirit-like presence parents spoke of to their children. Sometimes he served as a caution. Behave, or Samuel Carter will know your secrets. Sometimes he was a source of comfort. No matter what is done to us, Samuel Carter writes it all down. And one day there will be justice. Some believed he had passed away, finally liberated from the constant noise of the voices. Others thought he had discovered a way to silence them and live quietly under a new name. And some whispered that he was still traversing the world, still moving among the dead, still carrying the names of black men, women, and children whose suffering might otherwise vanish. Dr. Monroe's journals conclude with a final reflection she wrote not long before her death, a last attempt to comprehend the boy she once knew. She wrote that she had dedicated years to trying to explain Samuel through science, searching for a rational reason for abilities that seemed beyond reason itself. But perhaps I had been asking the wrong questions from the beginning. Maybe the true issue was never about figuring out how he did what he did. Maybe the point was to understand what his existence represented. Samuel Carter demonstrated that black people possessed abilities and intelligence that the society of his time simply refused to acknowledge. He showed that oppression and suffering do not always crush the human spirit. Sometimes they sharpen it into something rare and remarkable. He showed that justice, even when denied by human legal systems, can find its own way and speak through unexpected people. Whether the voices he heard were real, symbolic, or something we still do not fully grasp, the outcome remained the same. Hidden truths came to light. Crimes that were meant to stay buried were exposed, and a boy who should have been destroyed under the weight of slavery instead became a living testament to truth and accountability. That signifies more than any scientific answer I could have produced. The story of Samuel Carter compels us to face difficult questions about brilliance, about gifts that extend beyond ordinary limits, and about how society reacts when such gifts emerge in people it labels as lesser. How many other children like Samuel lived during the long centuries of American slavery? Children with sharp minds, rare abilities, and natural genius, children who might have changed the world yet were destroyed before their gifts could mature? How many voices were suppressed? How many talents were extinguished? How many futures were erased by a system designed specifically to deny the full humanity of an entire group of people? Samuel Carter was exceptional, but the world he was born into was not. Every black child born into slavery lived under the same threat, the same stripping away of basic human rights, the same violent obstruction of potential. Samuel survived long enough to utilize his gifts only because a few people, his mother, Dr. Monroe, the conductors of the Underground Railroad, chose to see his humanity and protect him whenever they could. But for every Samuel Carter who found a small shield of protection, there were thousands more who had no shield at all. Their names are lost, their stories vanished. Their abilities never had a chance to shine because they lived under a system meticulously created to crush exactly what made them exceptional. The true mystery of Samuel Carter is not whether the voices were actual spirits or whether he genuinely possessed supernatural powers. The deeper mystery is what it means to be human, to possess intelligence, gifts, and promise in a world determined to deny your right to exist as anything more than property. The mystery resides in how genius manages to persist under extreme oppression, how truth finds a way to speak even when speaking is dangerous, how justice insists on appearing even when every official institution attempts to suppress it. It is also about the countless brilliant black minds who endured slavery and the many years that followed, people who, even without recognition, transformed the lives around them in subtle but meaningful ways, even when they could not change the larger world. Samuel Carter may have heard voices echoing from the swamp, or he may have been so deeply attuned to the suffering around him that he perceived injustice the way some people sense an approaching storm. Either way, He became a symbol of something that terrified the proponents of white supremacy. He became proof that the entire concept of racial hierarchy was a complete fabrication. His intelligence, his abilities, and his very life challenged everything used to rationalize slavery and oppression. That is why his story was concealed. That is why official records were destroyed or locked away. That is why even Dr. Monroe's detailed notes were kept secret for so long. Samuel Carter was not dangerous because people died near him. He was dangerous because by existing, he proved that black humanity and black brilliance could never be eradicated, no matter how violent the system designed to erase them.